Happy Thanksgiving. I don't know about you, but I've been reading a lot the last couple of days because, of course, I had nothing to read, and so I put a bunch of books on hold at the library. And then I had all those books come in on the same day, which I have to say was honestly pretty convenient before Thanksgiving weekend when I had a little extra time to enjoy sitting on the couch and doing some reading. Um, One of those books that I'm reading right now is epic fantasy, and I read something just the other day that has stuck in my mind. Bear with me with the explanation. So in this series, there's a dwarf and an elf. Yeah, I know, but there's a dwarf and an elf that cross paths many times over the course of 7 or 8 books, and they don't like each other. And in the book I'm reading now, which is the seventh or eighth book in the series, the dwarf dies. Sorry to give it away. And leaves a small inheritance to the elf. So the elf says to the executor of the estate, "Why did he leave me money? He didn't even like me." And the executor replies, "Well, yes, but he said he'd hated you for so long, it felt like you were family." In some ways, this moment in this book really captures a whole lot of the book of Genesis. Love them or hate them, family is complicated. From Cain and Abel, Sarah and Abraham and Isaac and Ishmael, Jacob and Esau, sometimes things are lovely between family members, and sometimes they're not. You know, I've been thinking a lot this week about Thanksgivings of years past. I know you have too. Certainly, I've been reminiscing with friends and family and sharing stories and hearing other people's stories. And look, this year was really different. It was really different for all of us. It doesn't matter if you spent this year on Thanksgiving by yourself or with family or with friends. It wasn't the same. And it's those memories of Thanksgivings past that really, I think, highlight this truism about family being difficult. We all have a family member who probably likes to start fights every year at Thanksgiving, or the roles that we fall into within our family structures as older children or middle children or younger children or brothers and sisters or friends, right? We all have our part to play, and sometimes it's hard to break out of those parts. Sometimes we're excited to see our family on Thanksgiving. Sometimes we dread seeing our family on Thanksgiving. Sometimes both at the same time. Sometimes being with our families on Thanksgiving is a challenge, and sometimes we choose not to. There's a lot that this week's portion says about family and about love. My favorite part, I won't lie, is when Jacob falls in love with Rachel. It's a classic moment of youthful passion. Story goes like this. Jacob heads off to his father's cousin's house, because if you're going to find someone to marry, a first cousin's usually a good choice in the Bible. And Jacob arrives at a well near where his cousin lives, and there are a bunch of shepherds with their flocks there at the well. Now, the well here is covered with a giant boulder, which we understand to be a security device, right? That everyone has to gather, no one can steal water. On the slide that they all have to be there to kind of lift this giant boulder off. And he says to the shepherds, "Hey, do you know Lavan?" They say, "Yeah." And he says, is Lavan well? And they say, "He's doing great. In fact, here comes Lavan's daughter, Rachel." Now, we know just from the fact that this is a cousin coming down, we know that potentially Rachel could be a wife for Jacob. That's why he's there after all. And as soon as Jacob sees Rachel, with her flock, needing water for her flock. He runs over to the boulder and lifts it up all by himself and sets it to the side. He then runs up to her, kisses her on the lips, which kind of forward, and then starts weeping unbearably with love. And I just love this scene so much. I mean, I know many of you have seen this moment when a young person feels like showing off in front of someone he or she is immediately attracted to, makes a bold move, is overwhelmed by the emotion of the moment. And that's how we know Jacob is head over heels in love with Rachel. It makes sense that Jacob would then want to marry Rachel, because Jacob's model for a marriage is one of love. Jacob's parents, Rebekah and Isaac, loved each other. In fact, they are the first couple in the Bible about whom it says they loved one another. Prior to Isaac and Rebekah, couples were intimate, but they never used the word ohev, to love. So when he comes to Lavan and he says, please, I'd like to marry Rachel, and Lavan says, sure, just work for me for 7 years. Maybe that's why he's willing to wait, because he's head over heels in love, and he feels like marrying for love seems like a good choice. I mean, because honestly, maybe he could find another cousin that he wouldn't have to wait 7 years for. But in this case, he decides to wait. And I think that's one kind of love. And I think the model of Jacob waiting 7 years to marry Rachel, although it turns into many more as we know, is also a testament to his love, that it endures. But family, as we know, is not just love. Sometimes it's complicated. Lavan, of course, as future father-in-law, makes things complicated. First, he makes Jacob wait 7 years to marry Rachel while Jacob works for him. Then on his wedding night, Lavan swaps daughters, and instead, Jacob is so drunk, he, according to the text, he can't tell one from the other. Lavan sends Leah in, and suddenly Jacob is married to Leah. And the next morning, Lavan goes, well, lo ya'aseh chen bimkomenu. It's just not done to marry the younger daughter before you're older. But if you work another 7 years for me, then you can also marry Rachel. Now, for the moment, let's leave aside the terrible, terrible behavior of Lavan to his daughter Leah, who likely was not thrilled about this scheme to be married off to a man who was clearly in love with her sister, or to have it done under deceptive auspices. But this is Lavan here. This is Lavan with his future son-in-law, cheating him, making him work an excessive amount of time. 14 years Jacob devotes to having his 2 wives. And at the end of it, he wants to be paid for his time. And Lavan says, well, stick around a little bit longer. Another 5-6 years. And you can have all of the speckled goats and all the speckled sheep, the blemished goats, the blemished sheep. Those are the ones that you can keep. Long story short, Jacob works out a scheme and manages to multiply that part of the flock, so he's actually quite wealthy at the end of the time. But imagine what it would mean to have your father-in-law cheat you like that, to treat you as someone to be deceived, as someone not worthy of respect. Brutal. And yet, Jacob and Lavan are destined to be intertwined together. He's marrying into the family. And then we see the 2 sisters married to the same man, rivals for his affection and rivals in their competition to bear children to Jacob. But I really wonder, were they rivals before they got married to Jacob? Maybe it was the opposite. The text doesn't really say. But what if they had been friends, lifelong companions, family members that had cared for each other, but were thrown into an impossible situation that left them as rivals, that left them, somewhat forced into a competition for affection? That's kind of family too. Sometimes stuff just happens. And as much as we'd like to walk away or, find a different situation to be in with family, sometimes you don't have that privilege. And what happens at the end of his time with Laban? Jacob runs away. Rachel, in a fit of pique, steals the family's idols, but doesn't tell Jacob that she's done so. And Jacob runs away like a thief in the night with 2 wives, 2 maidservants, a lot of slaves, and a lot of sheep. Runs away like a thief in the night, and Laban has to chase after him. And they meet up and accuse each other of generally bad behavior. Laban accuses Jacob of stealing the family idols, treasured possessions. Jacob accuses Laban of being a cheat and a grifter. But they agree to part ways in peace. They don't agree to be friends. They do not agree to like each other. But they say, let's not fight anymore. Everyone has done wrong. Everyone has done their best. So they pile up stones as witness, as a marker. And they say, let us not pass this point, coming one to the other, this halfway point between where Jacob is headed back home and where Laban lives. Let us not pass this point with malice in our hearts. Let's just try. It's hard. It's hard. I can't help but think about our country right now. Seemingly split in 2. I think about how hard it is to agree on basically anything with those we see as though across a giant chasm. And yet still, our stories are intertwined. We're here together. In our town, our county, our state, and in our nation. And somehow, we have to hold it together. I kind of take some inspiration from Laban and Jacob. Not agreeing to disagree, they still don't agree. But agreeing to say, let us do our best in fraught times, in a challenging relationship, to be at peace. Let us make that our goal. It's not always easy. Well, in fact, it's always hard. But I hope that we can work for the day when we can find common ground, not in our politics or our beliefs or our faith, but just in our humanity. When we can encounter those with whom we disagree and begin to understand what Jacob said at the beginning of this week's portion, as he awoke from a dream with a ladder rising to heaven, and angels going up and down on it. As he awoke, he said, God is in this place, and I did not know. Shabbat shalom.